this is the other part that goes with it is extensions. What are you going to do next for Baltimore going forward?
Absolutely. And Buster, obviously, you're very familiar with Scott Boras, who he represents along those lines. And he represents a few of these Orioles, not all of the guys that potentially could get these long-term extensions. But I just want to ask you, do you think that these conversations are happening right now? Do you think this is going to be something where O's fans, they have to continue to rip their hair out and wait for extensions to happen for these guys, something that could happen sooner rather than later? What are your thoughts on that? When could we see these guys, the Gunnar Hendersons, the E. Jackson Hollidays, the Adley Rutschmans of the world, even Corbin Burnes potentially get extended here in Baltimore?
Yeah, I'm sure. My guess is Corbin Burnes is going to hit the open market. He's so close to free agency. But who knows? I mean, the Orioles, as I mentioned, they're in a position with so much payroll flexibility that they could take it a lot of different ways. You're right about Scott Boras, and it's important to mention that because with almost no exceptions, his clients will go to free agency. You know, there are players. Jared Weaver wanted to play with the Angels. He forced his deal through. Andrew Jones with the Braves forced his deal through. But for the most part, the Boras clients will go into free agency. Adley's an interesting guy to me, and we saw last winter, I never thought we'd see a situation where the Kansas City Royals would pay a face of the franchise like Bobby Witt as much money as they did. And guess what? Now he's locked up for a decade going forward. That to me would be the model for what the Orioles have to do, but they also have to be prepared because Adley is now having enough service time accrued where they're going to have to be prepared to pay him a lot of money. You guys see the Atlanta Braves sign a lot of their young players to these long-term contracts. Most of the time it happens just as the players starts progressing through the big leagues. Once you get any kind of service time, the leverage begins to switch over to the player. And so we'll see if they're actually willing to do that. My instinct is they're going to do it with somebody like that because you have so much payroll flexibility, new ownership, which is going to want to distinguish itself from John Angelos and what he was doing. So I think they'll do something.
Yeah, it feels like the writing's on the wall there. And you bring up the interesting point with Adley, and we've discussed this in the past. Adley has been, you can pinpoint the moment for the Orioles when things started to change. It was Adley's debut. You can talk about it. You can see it. The Orioles record, everything has changed despite the rest of the talent that has obviously helped this team win. But Adley is not the same age as Gunnar Henderson or Grayson Rodriguez or Jackson Holliday. Adley's going to get one real big shot to cash in. And so I think that he rightfully so needs to get paid a lot of money. And then the other question is going to be, well, how long do they think Adley's going to play catcher for? Is it going to be the next 3 to 5 years, or are you going to look for him to get more work at first base? Like Salvador Perez was just in town for the Royals. He started to transition to play more first because you is bad in the lineup. That's a problem for another time, but you're right. It feels like something's going to happen. And I made this joke before. I mean, Gunnar Henderson's the guy that I've seen around Buster a lot. I had two, excuse my language, but not really, but I had two oh shit moments. I played with Soto, played with around Gunnar. The only two players I ever had where I went, you guys are different. I got to find a way for you not to leave. Like I know the Nationals, it was crushing. He was my teammate in the minors, and Gunnar, his just everything about Gunnar was fascinating. And I think the Orioles are going to circle him. And so, but last question before I let you go, and if you're new to the show,
real quick, I was going to say,
what do you got?
When you look at Adley Rutschman, to me, the model for them to potentially follow is the Buster Posey contract. Because if you guys remember, I mean, he came back from when he got his ankle crushed, and I think he wound up signing after he played in 2012, like an 8-year, $160 million deal. We just saw Will Smith get 10 years, $140 million from the Dodgers, and those contracts are reflective of what you're talking about, Ryan, where you do have to, when you're talking about investing in a catcher, protect yourself to some degree because of how the player can get beaten up. And Salvador Perez is actually one of the rare instances where he signed a contract that was so team friendly that it felt like it was predatory. And Dayton Moore, who was then the general manager of the Royals, he and ownership decided to tear up that contract and give him something that paid him better because they were taking advantage of him so much. It's not often you see catchers get long-term deals. I guess Joe Mauer, right? Ron Shapiro negotiated, your dad's agent, like 10 years and 172 million, I think. Those are sort of the standards for catchers.
Yeah, and I want to just point out this one comment here, just saying about look what Corbin Carroll got last year. It should be a comp for Gunnar. The thing that I'll say that I know you understand this, Buster, but for all of our listeners out there too, when you get offered these deals, some of those, Corbin Carroll's deal to me is a steal, an absolute steal. When you're looking at it, Bobby Witt Jr., they invested more. The Julio Rodriguez deal has incentives that can keep driving his contract up. But players, why the Braves, and everyone's like, how do they get away with this? The player has to make the choice. Do I want the stability right now, which is a good amount of money, or do I want to play it out and see what happens? And a lot of the Boras guys, most cases, right, Buster, the Boras guys are saying, yeah, we're going to stand pat. Juan Soto, you want $350 million? That's okay. What was the final deal reported for Juan that was turned down?
Something like in the range of, it would have been a record, like 450 million. Yeah, and he's going to break Ohtani's record's not worth. I mean, his contract's not worth 700 million. That's a media-driven, mirage.
For sure.
It's worth 461 million dollars in present day. I think Soto is going to wind up breaking that number.
Yeah, and so that's the point, is that Soto said, hey, I'm good. I'm going to wait. Or Boras said he's good. He's going to wait, and he's going to cash in. He could win the MVP this year in the American League.